Hello and welcome to the QEM Heroes webinar series. I'm Christine Wood and I serve as the Assistant Program Director for the Heroes Fellows Program at QEM. For more than 30 years, QEM has been a national catalyst for STEM education transformation and research capacity building. Currently, the QEM network serves nearly 900 colleges and universities and reaches more than 8,000 individuals nationwide. This webinar is part of the HEROES initiative. The HEROES program brings together researchers with experience in the federal government to lend their expertise and support to the STEM research and education communities. Our fellows are here to provide tools and tips for navigating the funding landscape, developing STEM programs and partnerships, and improving talent retention in in-demand fields. We hope this series promotes engagement with our fellows and provides valuable resources to our participants. During the webinar, we invite you to use the Q&A tool to ask questions. And the webinar recordings and slides will be available in the QEM Resource Hub. By attending this webinar, you will be added to the QEM network and granted access to the Resource Hub. And I'm so happy to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Sharmini Boghos holds a PhD in Environmental Earth System Science and Archaeology from Stanford. Her experiences in STEM workforce development with minority-serving institutions include 8 years at Florida A&M University as the Assistant Director of the NOAA Center for Coastal and Marine Ecosystems and Interim Director of the Florida Georgia Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation. With expertise in science-informed program strategy, science diplomacy, federal grant management, and community engagement, Sharmini is committed to building inclusive ecosystems where science serves society through trust, transparency, and transformative partnerships. And Dr. Jennifer Riehl is an environmental scientist and policy professional with experience in multidisciplinary collaboration, federal grants management, and developing collaborative environmental science and land management policy strategies. She has expertise in forestry and community genetics, wildfire science, data science, environmental policy, and public outreach. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to our presenters today.
Thank you, Christine. Let me just share the slides here. All right, welcome everyone. We've got a couple of housekeeping items to mention before we get started. I just wanted to note that if you need closed captioning, you can turn them on under the More button as an option that says Show Captions. And then, as Christine mentioned, you will be able to access the slides after this presentation. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that the views expressed in this presentation are the presenter's own personal views only, and we're not representing NSF or the federal government, and the views expressed don't constitute official advice or guidance. They're based on our own experiences and research. So with that, let's go into what we're going to cover. So we're going to go through the recent supplemental changes that had been released in December and January for the PAPPG, or the Proposal and Awards Policies Procedures Guide. Before we go through the supplemental changes, we're going to go through a very brief history of the PAPPG and its structure. And then we're going to leave about 20 minutes at the end for questions and answers about the supplemental changes or any other PAPPG related questions that you all may have. All right, so the Proposal and Awards Policy Procedure Guide, or the PAPPG, is the main resource for understanding the rules and requirements for how to submit proposals to NSF, as well as how to manage your award. And it's a living document, and it's generally amended annually to reflect changes in law, policy, or to respond to a changing research landscape and its needs. So this timeline that we have here kind of goes through how the PAPPG was formed. So before 2006, they actually had separate guides. They had the Grants Proposal Guide, or the GPG, which was the guide for how to submit proposals. And then they also had the Grants Policy Manual, or the GPM, which was the guidelines for how to manage your award. Then in 2006, the NSF submitted a public comment request in the Federal Register to announce that they were going to be doing a 3-year assessment in which they were going to merge these two guides into one singular guide, and that was going to be the PAPPG. So then 2007 to 2011 is when they did their 3-year assessment. They merged both of those guides into the PAPG, and they had several iterations of it during that time. And probably one of the biggest changes that happened during that time was that they renamed the Grants Policy Manual to the Award and Administration Guide, or the AAG. So after their assessment period, they released kind of like a um, what is essentially the current format for the PAPG in 2011. And per NSB recommendations, they added a data management plan requirement and a postdoctoral mentoring plan requirement. So that was the big change that year. And then it relatively just got amended with basic updates every year after that until 2017 when they decided to just remove all of the references to the separate guide names, the GPG and the AAG. And so now it's just part one, which covers proposal submission, and part two, which covers award management. So fast forward to 2024, that's the most recent version of the PAPG that's in use. And then for 2025, the PAPG did not have like an updated version released in 2025. And this is part of the reason why there's been some supplemental releases at the end of 2025 and then the beginning of 2026, because they're trying to roll out some of the changes that would have probably been in the amended version that did not get released last year. And so the supplemental releases are kind of acting as a bridge to when they hopefully release the new version for 2026 sometime later this year. So that kind of gives us a brief history of the document, and we're going to briefly cover the structure of the PAPG before we dive into the supplemental changes that were announced recently in the end of December and January. And the reason why we're going to do that is because understanding the structure of the PAPG will help provide some context for these supplemental changes. So this is part one. It has 5 chapters that cover proposal submission process from the pre-submission stage all the way to proposal assessment. And in our first webinar that we did last month, we covered chapter 1 in part 1 on pre-submission information, as well as how to find funding opportunities. So if you were unable to attend that session, you can find the recorded webinar and the accompanying slide deck at the link provided on the right-hand side of the slide. For now, that first webinar on the PAPG, as well as this material, is kind of meant to provide a way to understand the structure of the PAPG so that you can adapt your use of it to the specific opportunities that you may end up looking at or applying to. That being said, we're also going to do another webinar later this summer to cover the other chapters in part 1, 2 through 5 in more depth. So be on the lookout for that. So there's also a subject index as part of the PAPG that we did not cover in our last webinar, and it can be really helpful when you're looking for a specific topic or have a specific question in mind. We're going to do a brief demonstration of that subject index after the next slide. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is that this is kind of a side note. All the QEM national webinars are going to be made available on the QEM Resources Hub, which Christine mentioned at the beginning. And you'll all have access to that because you participated in this webinar. So we've also placed the link to the National Webinar Series in general on the slide for your convenience. So for the rest of the structure for the second part of the PAPG, that includes chapters 6 through 12, and that covers how awards are made and administered. We're going to dive deeper into these specific chapters in September, October. You can check back for specific dates and time announcements for future webinars on the QEM National Webinar Series homepage, which is linked on this slide as well. So we're going to do a quick demonstration using the subject index to find information within the PAPG. I'm just going to switch to that. Okay, so this is the page for the most current PAPG, NSF 24-1. And you've got your little table of contents on the left-hand side here. So there's part 1 that we were just talking about and part 2. And then underneath that is the subject index. So let's say like you were doing a collaborative proposal and you wanted to know, well, how do I submit that? You were working with like another PI at another institution, for example. So you can go to the subject index and then we'll look under C for collaborative. And we'll just scroll down until we see collaborative. Okay, so there's a couple different things. Collaborative proposals is here. The one nice thing about this index, because it's an index, is it's going to tell you every time that topic is mentioned in the PAPG. So like if you want to know something specific, like how do I deal with a collaborative proposal, and you don't want to scroll through the PAPG itself or be searching through the PDF document, you can use this subject index to kind of shortcut get to those spots quicker. So there's 3 spots, all in the first part of proposal submission preparation, which makes sense, that this links to. And these links will take you directly to there. So this one's in chapter 2. So this is talking about documentation of collaborative arrangements, like how you have to write the letters. If we go back and we check the second time it's mentioned, this is probably the one that's going to be most interest if this is something that you were looking for information on. This section on collaborative proposals tells you how you're supposed to submit them, and there's 2 different ways in this particular example that we're going over. And then if we look at the last thing that's linked, this has more to do with like how you deal with withdrawing a proposal if it was something collaborative that you submitted with another PI. So that's just an example of like how you can kind of quickly find information in the PAPG by using this subject index. And we just wanted to show that to you all. So let's go back to the presentation now. Okay. All right. So now we've kind of covered the history of the PAPG document as well as what its overall structure is currently. I just wanted to mention that at the end of this presentation, you're going to find a slide with several links to proposal preparation organizational resources that are available on NSF's website, including a proposal preparation checklist. There's also another resource slide with QEM national webinars, both previous and upcoming, that we think might be of particular interest to those in attendance today. Before I turn it over to Sharmini to talk about the supplemental changes, though, and how they impact proposal submission, we just have a few quick questions about your access to proposal preparation services at your institutions. So that poll should launch soon.
We'll give participants a few more seconds to complete the poll.
All right. This is great. It seems like a lot of people have access to a sponsored research or sponsored programs office, and that they have also interacted with them. So that's good to know. And for those of you who haven't, if that's something of interest that you may want to see covered in the future, how to figure that out, how to go about using them, feel free to use the feedback form we'll be telling you about at the end of the presentation to add your comments about that. So thank you for sharing that information, everyone. All right, and I'm gonna turn it over to Sharmini now.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So now that we have an overview of what the PAPG is, we'll take a closer look at the 2 recent supplements that were published to update PAPG 24-1. We've included the links to the supplements here if you'd like to look at them again once you receive the presentation slides. Our previous webinar, as Jennifer mentioned, held on March 3rd, also provides an overview of the PAPG Part 1, Chapter 1, and how to use it based on common PI questions related to NSF funding opportunities. So for both Supplement 1 and 2, we will focus on the policy-related revisions. There are quite a few changes in Supplement 1 for the current PAPG. As you all know, there have also been quite a few policy changes in the past year. So for the purpose of this webinar, we grouped the supplement changes into 5 categories to simplify which policies are relevant to each change. We will briefly go over each group to identify the relevant changes, and then we'll open it up for the extended Q&A to dive deeper into the PAPG revisions that may be of particular interest to you, the audience. Throughout this presentation, the changes that are relevant to standard proposals are bulleted with a green diamond icon. The first group of changes are related to the CHIPS and Science Act, which was enacted in 2022 to invest in domestic semiconductor research, development, and production. The supplemented changes related to this policy all relate to research security and concerns regarding foreign malign actors. As an agency, NSF has a country-agnostic approach to research partnerships. However, if you are submitting a proposal with an international partner or international research contributors who are key personnel, you may want to take a closer look at these specific requirements. If you're unsure about this requirement as it relates to your proposal, you can attend my office hours for more information on this topic. We also provided links to the NSF OCRISP Research Security Training modules in the resource section at the end of this presentation that Jennifer mentioned. The next set of changes in Supplement 1 are minor changes related to the SBIR STTR programs. These programs focus on industry and nonprofit partnerships and research projects that are high risk, high reward. SBIR STTR proposals now require a pitch. This is similar to the pre-proposal submissions that were previously required, but the pitch has been formalized into a format that may be more familiar for industry partners. Also, reconsideration will no longer be allowed for any SBIR STTR proposals. You can see here that previously proposals could be reconsidered if they're submitted in phase 1. Now that is no longer the case. If an SBIR STTR proposal is rejected, that particular project is no longer eligible for reconsideration. So for these changes, if you're applying for SBIR or STTR, you'll want to review these specific requirements. If you would like to learn more about these particular programs, there was a webinar provided by our colleagues, Drs. Gregory Davis and Bradley Lusk, on this topic that can be found on the QEM webinar resource page. We've also provided a link to that webinar here, which will be available in the shared presentation slides. There were also a few changes in Supplement 1 that are related to the Code of Federal Regulations. The CFR is the codification of rules and regulations in the Federal Register. The Register is a daily publication of executive orders, policy statements, federal agency existing or proposed rules, and notices. The CFR is updated annually to reflect the final rules of the current volume of the Federal Register. Under the section for the right to transfer title, the threshold for equipment that qualifies for title transfer has increased from $5,000 to $10,000. So what does this mean? NSF's right to transfer equipment title to the agency now only applies to equipment with a value of $10,000 or more. There is also an annual inventory report required for these acquisitions. For federally owned property acquired during any active awards, you or your sponsored research officer will want to double check the specific requirements included in this supplement with regards to acquisitions made with a cost of $10,000 or more. Several of the changes listed cover requirements that are changing to meet modern expectations. For instance, physical checks are being phased out for payments as part of an executive order issued on March 25th of 2025. For the minimum number of reviewers, language was added to reflect the existing practice of 2 reviewers required at a minimum for each proposal. This will not effectively change the standard merit review process that was already in place. Although 2 is the minimum for internal review for certain types of awards, panel reviews would still likely require 3 external reviewers for most NSF programs. This may vary by directorate. Language was also added that proposals that do not provide sufficient content for review will be returned without review. And some of the language regarding tribal nations has also been changed. This was changed to include a wider range of federally recognized Indigenous groups. There were also adjustments made to the funding caps for planning, rapid, and eager proposals. Specifically, the planning proposal threshold is now $200,000. The limit for rapid proposals increased to $300,000, and the limit for eagers increased to $400,000. Finally, in Supplement 1, there are changes related to the gold standard of science executive order. This section also includes in language a specific reference to inclusivity that has been removed from the section related to scientific integrity. You are also now required to provide a justification for not sharing all data related to your award. There are also additional changes to the data management plan format in Supplement 2 that you'll want to pay close attention to. I'll now turn it over to Jennifer to go over a brief overview of the changes provided in that second supplement.
Thanks, Sharmini, for going over the entire first supplement, which had the most changes. I'm now gonna talk about the second supplement, which mostly is just about the implementation plan that NSF wrote in response to the gold standard of science executive order. So they've crafted an implementation plan that's publicly available to read, and it's linked on this slide for your reference. I see it's covered up a little bit. I'll make sure that's fixed so that you all can see that and use it more effectively. But before I go into more detail on the changes that have been made to the PAPPG as a result in this from the second supplement, we're going to first define what the gold standard of science is advocating. So there's a word cloud I have on this page that contains the 9 tenets that illustrate what the gold standard of science is meant to foster. Things like subject to unbiased peer review or reproducibility, collaborative and interdisciplinary. Most of these are already a core part of how science is conducted. There's actually a nifty table in the NSF implementation plan that outlines what NSF is and has been doing to meet these 9 tenets. And spoiler, most of these things they're already doing. So the main changes as a result of this EO have more to do with what data is required to be shared and how that data is shared. So we're going to dig into the changes that are outlined in Supplement 2 next. So the first one is about public access to research products. The implementation plan that NSF put forth resulted in some changes to the Public Access Repository, or PAR, and also to research.gov. In short, it focuses on how data is identified and collected and what meets the expectations of data sharing. So most of the changes are meant to accommodate a changing landscape of what constitutes a research product, and then also making sure that they're accessible as soon as possible to the public. So for example, previously the language for some of these sections talked about peer-reviewed research articles specifically, and so they've kind of changed that to just be research products so that it applies to more than just peer-reviewed research articles. And then another example, you can now submit peer-reviewed research products, including articles, before they're actually published. So post peer review, but before they're officially out there, you can submit them into the repository, and then that counts as meeting that requirement for making the products of your research accessible to the public. And then some of the other changes that are just, like Sharmini mentioned, we put this green diamond there to indicate things that might require action on your part for when you're submitting a proposal or when you're managing your award and submitting reports and things like that. So those are the ones to focus on for things that you might have to do. But then the ones that we left with the black squares are more things that might change with how they've written something or how that system works. And so that's something else that you're going to notice, at least with interacting with research.gov and the public access repository, is you'll notice some changes, like you can't directly add data sets to project reports anymore. It's going to auto-populate metadata for project reports now, and then it's going to automatically give persistent identifiers to research products that may not have like a DOI, for example. So that covers the public access to research products changes from Supplement 2. Another area where there's some changes is dissemination and sharing. Most of the changes to this section are language changes to make them consistent with the new data management and sharing plan requirements that Sharmini had discussed a couple of slides back. The only change here that has a direct impact on what you need to know as a proposer or an awardee, rather, is that there's a new requirement that you have to get written approval from the managing program officer to make changes to your data management sharing plan once it's been submitted. And then the new requirements for the data management plans, there's two major changes in drafting the data management sharing plan that you should be aware of. First, there's going to be a new tool launched at the end of this month. They're saying right now that it should be in effect on April 27th, 2026. And that tool is going to be kind of like a way for you to create a data management and sharing plan as part of your proposal submission that fills out a form consistently. So it's going to be uniform across everybody doing it, and it's going to effectively eliminate the two-page limitations and other formatting requirements that were previously written down in the PAPPG for data management and sharing plans. But not until April 27th. Before that, you still follow the same way that the current PAPPG states in terms of how you write a data management and sharing plan. And then finally, just to reiterate something that Sharmini already brought up because it was also mentioned in Supplement 1, is that you're now going to need to provide a justification for why certain data should not be shared publicly, like, for example, privacy concerns. And as a note, after the Q&A slide, you're going to find several slides with resources. There will be one that has every single one of these supplemental changes listed here by chapter in the PAPPG. And it will be linked to that chapter in the PAPPG, the NSF website for the supplemental change. And then it's also connected to the slide summaries that we have created in this presentation. And we did that so that you could easily navigate and go back to those changes and see what NSF has done, but then also compare it to, the explanation that we've provided. So I'm going to turn it back to Sharmini so that she can close this out and we can open up for Q&A.
Okay, great. So that concludes our summary of the recent revisions to the current PAPPG. We should have enough time for an extended Q&A to go over any general questions you may have about the PAPPG or the supplements. And we can also discuss concerns you have with any of the changes and how it might affect the proposal submission process. As you prepare your questions for the Q&A, I just want to point out that Jennifer and I also have office hours, as I mentioned, if you have specific questions about the topics covered here or anything else. You can reach us through the email addresses listed here on the slide, and you can also access important QEM-related resources using the QR codes on the right. and that includes future webinars and information on all the QEM research heroes. We also have additional resource links after this slide that we mentioned. We'll be making those available to you in the downloadable version. And finally, we'd love to have your feedback on this webinar and what was helpful or could be improved. If you have specific topics for funding opportunities you'd like to see featured in future webinars, please include those suggestions to your feedback. We do check those, and you can use the webinar feedback form linked at the bottom of the page. So thank you for spending this time with us, and we now have about 30 minutes for general questions.
Thanks to you both for a really informative presentation. We have a couple questions in the Q&A box, and I'll read the first question. If we were planning to collect maybe DEI related data in addition to the data mentioned in our proposals, is the additional data we collect required to be turned in by these new rules?
You can chime in too, Jennifer, but it's my understanding that that would be required, that you have to have a written exception for any data that's collected that contains personal identifiable information or is sensitive in any nature. So there are a few exceptions, but they are generally asking for all data.
Yeah, Sharmini is correct about that, is that if you want to limit what data has to be shared, then you have to write that exception into your data management and sharing plan. But the list of exceptions for that is something that had already existed in the PAPG, and it includes things like privacy concerns and other things. And so let me see if I can pull it up. So I think it's something definitely like if you're concerned about it, I would definitely reach out to the program officer that you may be working with and ask them like what's the best way to approach like making sure that you're safeguarding people's personal information in the best way possible and writing in that explanation. I was going to see if I can see where the wording for that was really quick. There it is. Okay. So, okay, yeah, it was in the second supplement. They kind of covered like two things on data management sharing. The one was just some rewording in the first one, and the second supplement is where most of that information is. Yes, there we go. I found it. Okay, so let me just share that really quick. So if you look at this is from Supplement 2, Dissemination and Sharing of Research Results. They've got down here, right here where I'm kind of highlighting exceptions to this sharing. It used to be an expectation, they've turned it into a requirement. So that's like the major change there. But they still have that you can request that, for example, to safeguard privacy and rights of individuals and subjects. If it affects the validity of the results, if it affects the integrity of the collections, or to accommodate the legitimate interest of investigators. So the good thing is that there's a lot of room for discretion on like what constitutes as an exception. So I think it's something that is still pretty flexible. And like I mentioned before, working with your program officer is probably the best way to move forward with that if you're concerned about how to write that up.
Okay, and so our second question is, are there any things we should be aware of data sharing wise in the first supplement that impact either proposal submission or awards?
So in the first supplement, the data sharing was very brief. I think most of the changes are in supplement 2, and there may be subsequent changes with standard formatting for the data management plan that will be launched later this year. So right now, the applicable rules would mostly be found in supplement two.
Yeah, Sharmini is right about that. Like the one change that gets mentioned in supplement one is more just a language change once again from saying that it's like an expectation to it's a requirement. And then the actual instructions like for submitting data management plans, the language for that was changed in supplement two. So most of the information, like there's nothing in supplement one that isn't covered fully in supplement two in terms of data management and sharing plans. So if you're looking for what do I need to do in terms of data management and sharing plans, you could pretty much so just look at supplement two for that.
Right.
And we encourage more questions. You're also allowed to raise your hand and we can take you off mute if you'd like to answer or ask a question live. Dr. Erickson, you are coming off mute.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies, for presenting. Could you go a little bit more into the SBIR and STTR changes? I wasn't exactly sure I understood um, the reconsideration piece.
Mhm. Yeah, so the main change here is that previously SBIR and STTR proposals had a phase one and phase two. There's some like transfer to usage requirements within those programs. And previously, you could submit a phase one proposal that could be reviewed and sent back for revisions and reconsidered. And that phase one exception is being taken out here. So now, if the proposal is sent back, um, let's see, with that it can no longer be
Here's
considered
Sharmini.
in
I just
its
put up like what the
things.
actual language change is for you to help you out there.
Yeah,
Sorry for the
thanks.
interruption.
No, you're fine. Yeah, so we have some of the language on the slides, but the submission of these would no longer be considered after, even if they were a phase one proposal. So at this point, for phase one and phase two, that project itself is considered um, not eligible for the
Yeah, and they're
program.
not even showing the full text here, but
Yeah.
they do link it to the actual part of the updated PAPG in the supplement here. So like if we click on this chapter right here, we can see like where that fits in. So I think, oh, it's down. Well, maybe it's not. I'm trying to remember where it was in here. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay, so applicability. NSF's under number two, reconsideration process is available to individuals and organizations concerning proposals for award funding, and it does not apply to, and then it lists a bunch of different things it doesn't apply to. And here under part B, proposals for all these different things, and then it used to say under 7 and 8 here, phase one proposals for SBIR, and then under 8, phase one proposals under STTR. And so what they did is they just took phase one out. That's how they changed the language. So basically, it just means that before they took that out, it was just that you couldn't resubmit a phase one proposal, not a phase two one. But now they're removing this phase one language, so it's just any STTR or SBIR proposal can't be reconsidered.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's a good example of some of the resources we'll provide at the end of the presentation slides. We'll also include those links to the specific um, summary, and then there's extensions to the specific chapters within the PAPG that those are related to. So you
Yeah.
can see those resources here.
And to illustrate what Sharmini just said, so this first link where it says like SBIR, STTR project pitch submissions, so that's going to link to the actual supplemental change. on NSF's website. And then over here is the link to the slide where we talked about that change in here. And I purposely named them the title of the slide that it links back to so that it's easy to understand. And then we tried to write like a little bit of an instruction here for how that works. But this is just kind of like a one-stop slide if you want to see like, okay, these are all the changes that are being made in the different chapters, supplement 1, supplement 2. Okay, what was that again? What did we say in our presentation to give a little bit of an explainer to it? Then you can find that stuff very easily right there.
Thanks, Jennifer. We had one written question come in before our raised hand, so I'll read that to you. It is a follow-up to the data sharing question. I'm proposing a study of all students, but I was going to collect demographic data that would allow me to also run a study on my own, unfunded, of how the implementation affects protected groups. So I may likely run focus groups with those protected groups and publish on that. If I delineate that the NSF grant isn't paying for the protected group research, does that mean that the protected group research work data doesn't need to be shared back?
I don't know if I can answer that with 100% certainty. It's definitely something you could talk to your program officer about, and that's what I would recommend. But I believe the data sharing has to do with NSF funded work specifically. So it depends on whether or not they consider the collection of that data, if it's being done under the award, the NSF award, does that then mean anything you do with it is covered or not? And I just don't want to give you the wrong answer. So that'd be the point that you'd probably want to clarify with a program officer.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Sharmini.
No, I agree with that assessment. I do think if you are making that separation of it not being the NSF funded activity, that you would likely not have to report that, but it is best to check with your program
Yeah.
officer on those specifics.
Okay, thanks. And we have a raised hand from Lena Arnold. You can come off mute, Lena Arnold.
Oh, okay. I just had a quick question regarding the SBIR and STTR. I was in one of the workshops last month, and I thought that they were no longer accepting submissions. Does this mean it's back open, or did I just misunderstand?
So it's still kind of in limbo. I
Mhm.
just actually looked that up to see like what was going on with it. Like they finally, like Congress finally like passed funding for the program again. But the problem is that the president, it has to be delivered to the president's desk to be signed, not signed, vetoed, whatever. And they haven't done that yet. So that's kind of like where we're at. Like as soon as it gets delivered to the president's desk, then basically he can sign it, veto it, or not sign it. If he doesn't sign it, then 10 days goes by, it just goes into effect anyway. Um, I don't know that you would veto it. There's probably like some stories you can find online about what's going on with that and why it's kind of being held. But I don't know much more than that about why. Like I just know what's going on, but not necessarily the motivation behind it.
And
Okay, cool.
while it's
Thank
in
you.
limbo, there's still opportunities to advocate or um, to support that passing.
Yeah, like call your members of Congress and
Yeah.
like, hey, why have you not delivered this yet? I mean, they're also not in session right now until what,
Sure.
the end of this week, right? I think they come
Yeah.
back next week.
Yeah.
So, and it looks like Brad is on, so he
Oh,
has
great.
mentioned something, which is great because he knows more about this than I do. Oh, he does have it now. Okay. All
Okay.
right. I didn't, last time I had heard, like, it still hadn't been delivered. But if it is there, then that's good because then it'll just be automatically renewed on April 14th, like Brad just said. So that's good. So that's better than the news I had originally. Thank you, Brad.
Yes.
Okay, and we have one short question in the Q&A box. Is the SBIR STTR pitch an actual talk or a written proposal?
Great question. It is written. Yeah, even though a pitch would normally be spoken. Yeah, it is a written document. And
I
they
think,
have
oh, go
formatting.
ahead, Sharmini.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
oh no, I was just saying they have formatting specifications that we've linked to there as well, which you'll get the links at the end.
Yeah. And I was just going to add that, like, I think the reason why they changed it is because some of like the standard ways kind of submitting like pre-proposals and things are more geared towards an academic way of presenting an idea, and
Exactly.
that's not as accessible to people in small business or industry that may be submitting to this program. And so I think part of what they're doing with this is trying to create like a kind of pre-submission process that aligns more with the way that people talk about their ideas in that community.
We still have about 14 minutes left for questions if folks would like to raise their hands or put a question in the Q&A box.
And feel free to ask about PAPG stuff in general too. Like it doesn't have to just be about the supplements. So like if you had lingering questions from the last thing that we did or anything that we haven't covered yet, feel free to ask.
And we have a raised hand from Patsy Huey.
Yes. Good morning, afternoon. I have a question here. This is about which supplement changes affect only the post-award administration, and which ones should investigators think about doing the proposal development?
So the one easy way to tell the difference between that without having to look at the actual change itself is what chapter in the PAPG it impacts. So anything to do with proposal submission is chapters 1 through 5, whereas anything to do with awards administration is chapters 6 through 12. So, like, if we're on the slide, the direct links to supplemental changes slide still right now, I believe. So if you look, like, after this first change about SBIR, it says Chapter 1D. So that's about proposal submission because it's in Chapter 1. And a- if we get down to some of these other ones that are about like disclosure reports, which happen during an award, foreign financial disclosure reports. You can see that says Chapter 7, which is part of Part 2 in the PAPG. So that's one like kind of easy way to see like, okay, which ones affect like proposal submission versus awards management.
Thank you for that explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
We have another question in the Q&A tool. Is there a guideline to know what you would use the conference proposal route for? Like we're trying to submit for a week-long institute as professional development, but also discussion and convening of like-minded folks concerned about the same things. It might be an implementation, but we can see a way to frame it as a conference grant. Is there some way to know which way we should go and what's more likely to get funded?
Yeah, so I mean, there's kind of like two ways that conference proposals get submitted to NSF, and you can add or correct me if I say anything wrong, Sharmini, but this is my understanding. So the one is that when they're directly called for, which happens sometimes. But then the other, a lot of times conference proposals are things that like PIs come to NSF with, and the way that at least I'm familiar with how people do that is they go and they talk to the relevant program officer or in whatever directorate they're in, and they say, hey, like I have this idea, I think it could fit a conference proposal. What do you think? And they will kind of give you feedback on whether or not they think that's the best route or if you should use a different route to submit your idea. So those are the two ways that I'm familiar with. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Sharmini.
Yeah, I think you may also want to look to see if it would fit under a workshop. That's the only other format that I think might also work for the suggestion. And both of those are sort of outlined within the PAPG if you do a search for those specific conference or workshop. And yeah, I agree with Jennifer that the best route would be to speak directly to a program officer um, in the directorate related to the topic that you're looking for. And in some cases, I think we mentioned before that there may be eager funding available through eagers that may also fit this. So a program officer would be able to determine where that might fit best for what's available in terms of funding.
Yeah, there's a short follow-up question. Is there a workshop grant and where would I find that?
I think it's more of a formatting.
Yeah, I
I
don't
don't know. I'm
know.
not as familiar with the workshops. Do you know more about that,
Yeah,
Sharmini?
I've um I think the one I've done a few workshops with people and I think they did end up submitting them as eagers and then they were funded that way, but it was through uh we also put out a DCL for workshop suggestions. So there are a couple of different avenues, and I think the PAPG may have a few references specifically to workshops that might give you some additional ideas.
I just used the subject index real quick to see if it
Great.
had that, but it doesn't have workshops listed specifically. And so,
Oh,
like, I'm
okay.
also kind of wondering if it's something that just fits under the conference proposal mention. Um,
Possible.
Let me see. Right now, I'm gonna pull up here. Can all you all can see this as well.
Yeah.
Let's see. That's what after well, that's budget. Feel like oh, that's for that's budget again too. You look at no, I don't want it there. Ah, here it is. I knew it was there somewhere. Okay, so this one's about conference proposal specifically. This is the information that's in the PAPG. And so I would think that probably workshops fit underneath this somehow. But once again, because of the way that some of this runs, like if it's like a specific request for like workshops, for example, like Charmany just mentioned, there was a Dear Colleague letter that called for that specifically. That's one way, like they're going to tell you in that Dear Colleague letter, how do you submit that? Like, do you submit it under a conference proposal or do you submit it under like a general, proposal, like a standard proposal, excuse me. But if it's more of an idea that you have that isn't like for a specific call for that, then it's the program officer knowledge that's going to help you out the most in this case because it's going to depend on the specific context, what directorate you're in, what opportunities are available. It may, bigger programs like Eager may apply to your situation, but they're going to know that information and they're going to be the best resource that you have to help navigate like what your best option is. And having that help is going to make it more likely that you're going to have more success with what you do rather than going in kind of blind.
Right. Another question. Is the best way to find out if there is a DCL for something we are interested in to search research.gov?
Yeah, I mean, you can look there. You can also look for use the funding search tool on NSF's website and just search for DCLs specifically. There's like a few other options too. Like if you are looking for something in a specific directorate, you can go to a specific directorates page for that and they will list all of their current opportunities. And we did some explorations of how to use both of those things in our last webinar. So you can go back to that if you want to see like a demonstration for how to use it. And then I think the other way, like if you want to kind of be kept up to date on, what current opportunities are or opportunities that are coming out, like new opportunities, sign up for alerts for whatever specific part of NSF you're interested in, like if it's a specific directorate or if it's like a specific type of grant, like there's a lot of options for that, like just on NSF's homepage, like you scroll to the bottom, you can sign up to get email updates and you can specify like what kind of updates you want to get essentially. And that's another thing we also kind of covered in our last webinar. So there's information there for that too. But if you're having trouble with any of this stuff, like feel free to schedule an office hour with one of us and we'd be happy to walk you through it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, we have about 4 minutes. Thank you. Patsy Huey says, great webinar. Thank you very much.
Happy to help.
Thank you.
That's what we're here for.
If there are no further questions, I want to thank both Jennifer and Sharmini for a really informative webinar today, and thank you all for your participation. And have a great day, and we hope to see you at a future QEM webinar. Please check our events page on the QEM website, qem.org, under events. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.